Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to our monthly McDonald & Associates monthly webinar. This month, we have chosen a topic which, for the individual sitting to my right, who is my wonderful associate, Ms. Catherine Marshall, we have chosen a topic that we feel is of the utmost importance in today's society, and in particular, how it impacts the overall workplace. Ladies and gentlemen, Canadian employers lose $77.9 million annually due to the direct and indirect impacts of domestic violence. We know that the costs to individuals are enormous, as they are to their families and society, but it goes far beyond that. We have a moral, ethical responsibility to do something about it. And now the federal government is now looking at legislation, Bill C-75, which is geared toward doing something about it. In respect of that, to let you know, in 2013, there were over 90,000 incidents reported. So this is a widespread national and provincial problem which workplaces need to address. Among those who have experienced domestic violence, over a third reported that the violence affected their ability to go to work. Over half of those who had experienced domestic violence reported that it continued in the workplace in some way. For example, harassing phone calls from the abuser and stalking. Of those who had experienced domestic violence, the vast majority reported that it affected their work performance such that they were fatigued, loss of energy, distraction. Over a third of those who had experienced domestic violence, they had discussed violence with someone at work. And the most common people to whom domestic violence was disclosed were coworkers, supervisors, and managers. The vast majority of individuals, whether or not they had personally experienced domestic violence, believed that it impacted the work lives of those experiencing abuse quite a bit or a whole lot. And yet most respondents also thought that employers were not aware when domestic violence was affecting their employees. They believed that workplace supports such as paid leave and safety policies can reduce the impact of domestic violence on the work lives of workers. Now, this survey from which I'm reading has come from research which was a collaborative effort between the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children, led by Barbara McCrory, at Western's Faculty of Information and Media Studies, Wathan and McGregor, and the Canadian Labour Congress, and is all supplied in a brochure entitled, "Can Work Be Safe When Home Isn't? Initial Findings of a Pan-Canadian Survey on Domestic Violence and the Workplace." To both Ms. Marshall and I, who see it on a regular basis with both our employer clients and our employees, we feel that the time has come to be able to address this in the workplace so that the workplace can become a safe haven for those individuals experiencing domestic violence. As we know, Bill 132 required training of employers in respect of sexual harassment. There was no clause present for actually training on domestic abuse. And it is our hope that, in fact, we are going to be able to see that kind of change in the workplace across Canada within the next few months. We know that, in fact, domestic abuse is a widespread problem, and we support a charity called the Shelter Movers, and that's a non-for-profit organization which specializes in assisting those who are domestically abused and moving them from their homes to their shelters. And it's an incredibly important organization, and one that we hold in the highest of esteem. But the workplace as well can do something about it, can't it?
It definitely can.
And Ms. Marshall has actually written an article to the Huffington Post, which was published, and which contained what she believes and what I believe to be some of the most important things that the workplace can do. So, Catherine, can you lead us through what it actually would require a workplace to do to discover and be able to address domestic violence?
Definitely, Natalie. Number one, employers should have a list of resources that victims of domestic abuse that work in their organization can access. Things like shelters, hotlines, counselors, medical professionals, relief shelters. That should be a resource that's available that they can immediately give to the employee, should the employee be in that kind of a situation. The employer needs to immediately ensure that the employee is safe. That's the most important thing from the get-go, because of course, the employee could be in a very dire situation where they're in immediate danger, them and their children. So one of the things the employer can do is find out, is there any next of kin? Is there any, family member, friend, a safe place that they can go to if the home is in fact a danger zone, which it often is in a domestic violence situation. So ensuring the office is safe. This is so important. One thing that we know from the studies on domestic violence is that an abuser will often use the workplace as a way of accessing their victim. They will stalk the victim there. They will try to contact them. They'll show up at the office. They will try to find out information from other people who work there as to the whereabouts of the victim. And so the employer needs to ensure that the employee's privacy is protected. So removing any like cell phone numbers, address, anything that might be on like a directory, a website, and ensuring that the office receptionist knows that this individual who's the abuser is not allowed to come in, and that if they do turn up, the police are immediately contacted. So providing the office manager or the building manager with a photo of that individual and their name would be critically important.
I've had a situation actually, Catherine, where representing one of my employer clients, that we had to do just that. As a matter of fact, one of our employees had come in and who had advised that she had been domestically abused and that her husband was on a rampage, and we had to go into total lockdown, as a matter of fact. And that's when actually HR, you do need to call your lawyer quite quickly to ensure that you know what is going on, because things happen so quickly. Privacy is not a concern, which I know is a very common question that arises. What about the person's, really your number one concern in that respect is safety, and not only safety of your employee who has been domestically abused, but of course all the other employees within the workplace, because of course we've seen unfortunate and horrific tragedies where in fact other employees become the victims of a rampage of domestic violence.
Yes, that's a really good point. And I do remember there was a case in British Columbia a few years ago where that is what happened, where the abuser turned up at the workplace of his victim, and he actually murdered her. And so ensuring that the whole office is safe and the victim is safe is so important. Human resources staff should be trained in how to address and assist a victim of domestic abuse and violence. This is really important because domestic abuse is obviously a very sensitive topic. It's extremely personal. Usually the victim feels a lot of shame. And, you know, they're very concerned about what's going to happen to their family, their children. And it's something that maybe they've held inside them for a long time. So specialized training is available. Usually, you know, even contacting a women's shelter, you can get someone to come in and conduct that training, maybe even for no cost. But it's really important that, you know, the professionals who work in the human resources department know what to do when they're speaking with someone who makes these concerns known.
Well, we've had a number of questions actually that came in prior to our webinar today, and I think it's time that we address some of them. The first one that came in is a question which I think is extremely important. And it's particular to Ontario, and of course, we know that federally speaking, there is Bill C-75, which is under consideration at the moment, which is going to start to address domestic abuse from a federal perspective. What is the law in Ontario is the question, and what is the particular ability for an employer to provide domestic violence leave? Catherine, can you share with
Absolutely.
us that?
Domestic violence leave is now a is a protected job leave in Ontario. So if someone is invoking that leave, they are entitled to 10 paid days leave of absence and up to 15 weeks of unpaid leave of absence. Typically they would simply notify their employer and provide their employer with a note, and that would invoke the leave.
That's right. So the employer does pay for those 5 days, but they're allowed the 10, and then they have up to 15, and it's excellent because it's something obviously that if someone is in need of serious you know, time within which to address this, and of course, I'm sure, and we can all understand that this not only involves the actual employee, but the families, and trying to ensure a safe, you know, a safe departure, so that that time is necessary. And fortunately, our law does provide that. So I think that is really important. Where I think our law is a little short in terms of what employers need to know is straight through the legislation. Because there's no particular provision that we have to be trained in our knowledge of domestic violence. But as you can tell from the statistics that we started with, it's a major, major problem. And going unaddressed, really, I think it creates more problems in the workplace than one can imagine. So I think it's really important in that respect. We've also been asked about how managers detect domestic violence is happening. And I think this is a bit of a sensitive situation, Catherine. I know that one of the things I always like my employers to be able to do is to actually have a conversation with the employee and to be able to take that employee aside. Again, I know that there's concerns out there that this is a private matter, but actually it really isn't. And if someone is being hurt and someone needs assistance and the manager becomes aware of that, the manager has to take some action.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It is a really sensitive topic. And one thing we know as well about domestic violence is typically, you know, a victim will tell their close friends, and often their close friends include colleagues at work. And sometimes, you know, you watch the movies and you watch TV, and there's a stereotype that a victim of domestic violence is going to look really unruly and have bruises everywhere. Well, we know that's not true. That, you know, domestic violence does not discriminate, and you know, you can't tell by looking at a person. So, you know, being aware of what maybe people are saying around the office and picking up on cues is really important. But having that conversation in a private, sensitive manner is the critical entry point to having that dialogue.
I agree. And I think I mean, this sort of is a great segue into our next question, which is when a manager becomes aware of an abusing employee, what actions are actually required for that manager to take? Well, first of all, we know with workplace harassment, if there is workplace harassment, that manager is immediately responsible for addressing it and ensuring that it is elevated properly. And certainly, I think the manager is often at the forefront of these kinds of situations. With domestic violence, when a manager becomes aware of this, the manager, again, legislation is so different for domestic violence. It's not the same as harassment, but hopefully Bill C-75 will start to shed light on this, as will obviously our provinces that will fall in line. But managers really have a responsibility to make sure not only that employee is safe, but they also have that responsibility to make sure that all the other employees are safe. So the manager has to start immediately by doing a risk assessment. And a risk assessment is no different than a risk assessment in a sexual harassment or a harassment situation, because what the manager wants to do is find out immediately, is that employee safe, right? Is there something that we need to do right away to make that employee safe? And then if the situation is critical, we would suggest strongly that you involve the police right away, because the police are really the individuals in our society who are best equipped to be able to deal with this, because it's not a home problem, it's a societal problem, and it's violence. And it's something that the police can easily intervene in and assist and be able to provide a wealth of information. The other issue is that employers should know, and managers will as well, should also know, that there are all sorts of shelters available. And they should also know which guidance counselors and counselors are available to assist those who are domestically abused. And that list should be readily available, so that if there is that kind of situation that's required, that not only the police can be involved, but also a counselor. I think one of the issues is, for so long, domestic abuse was not reported. It was seen by those who were domestically abused, and for the majority of time it was women, that it was a weakness on their part, that it was something that was, going to be a negative commentary on the family or the manner in which they acted, or the most horrible thing is they brought it on themselves. And I think that kind of situation, that kind of scenario, led to many, many women deciding not to report it. Much like sexual harassment in the workplace, much like harassment in general, I'm the one who, essentially, I'm the reason that this is happening. And so if I don't report it, then it'll go away. And now that it is something that we are seeing, we need to know the resources available, and there are so many that can assist on this. But the first step is to make sure that if it's an immediate risk, that you involve both the police and the counselors. If it's something that has been ongoing, I think we still want to involve the police and the counselors, but at maybe a more sort of appropriate time, not as immediate, depending on what that person does. But that person is going to need a lot of psychological counseling, and you as the employer are not equipped for that, nor should you be. You just need to know where to direct that employee. I think that's important.
Those are really good points. And speaking about the psychology of a victim who's been domestically abused, you might find that they are minimizing the danger, that they're minimizing the harm, because maybe it's something they've had in their life for a long time. And as a coping mechanism, they've just taken that pain and that hurt, and they've, kind of brushed it off. And it's common that they might not actually see the danger that exists in a way that someone who's hearing about it for the first time will see. And they've probably never contacted the police before. And maybe they're worried if they contact the police, the first thing that will happen is their partner will be arrested And that is actually usually a huge concern, because often there's children involved, and people get really concerned about, you know, their parent of their child being hauled off to prison. But that is not actually usually what happens. And, you know, things like restraining orders are usually the necessary first step. So, you know, you might have to deal with, you know, all of those very complex issues when you're speaking to someone who has these issues.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. Catherine makes a great point, and I agree wholeheartedly with that. I was thinking as you were speaking, Catherine, that one of the issues that we do see is the issue of stalking in the workplace. And I think we need to address that, because stalking is stalking. It's a criminal code offense, and it's something that does happen very regularly in domestic abuse cases, in the sense that the employee will be either harassed through telephone voicemails or cell phone sort of contact, or multiple texting. And I think it's important that if the employer has the ability to sort of assist in that regard, that the employer steps up and maybe assists in changing a number, so that the employee has a new number and that person can't be harassed. If the employer has control over the telephone, I think that's a very important thing to do. I think that those sorts of things, where we see text messages and telephone, they need to be taped. They need to be printed out as messages, because they're going to become evidence likely later on. And you as the employer can say, don't call here again. And if you call here again, we will involve the police. So you can actually take some proactive steps in that regard as the employer. But again, you don't want to overstep the police. You don't want to overstep what they need to do. But I think you can certainly be assertive and say, you know, we are protecting our employee, so that the harasser knows that that is the case. In more serious cases, as I've dealt with before, where, for example, unfortunately, a woman who very bravely and courageously charged her husband with domestic abuse, the husband was let out on bail. And he then started stalking her. And our workplace was extremely, extremely efficient at locking down the workplace, making sure that she was taken to a safe place, worked with the police. Actually, we hired 2 security guards for the front entrance, because there was no security, because she wanted to come to work. So she felt better in the workplace. We had changed the phone number. We had taken all sorts of steps. But the police were very helpful in that regard, because they let us know that this man was on the loose and that they were looking for him. It was a manhunt, but it was something that we had to step in immediately. And we told her she didn't have to come back to the workplace, but she felt safer and better and almost more productive being there. But we took extreme steps in that regard, and again, made sure she had someone driving her back and forth, one member of her family.
And now, you made a good point earlier about, you know, privacy and, you know, phone numbers and stalking. We do live in a day and age now where everybody puts their life on the internet. And, you know, most companies nowadays have Twitter accounts, LinkedIn accounts, all kinds of social media, websites. You know, if there's an event, they're putting it online. Those are other things that employers need to look at when protecting the safety of their employee who is a victim of domestic violence, because you need to be aware that the perpetrator might be checking those social media feeds to find out maybe where the employee is, how they can access them. Oh, okay, are you guys doing a charity run? Well, I'm going to show up there, right? So those are things, you know, in our hyper-social society, we really need to take a look at.
I think that's an excellent point. I totally agree with that. And I think that that's almost a more widespread point, that we all need to be aware of what is put online, because certainly, yeah, we have that ability. We live in a fishbowl these days,
yeah.
and everything we do is under scrutiny, and certainly those who want to find certain information can. So I think that's a really excellent way to end this. Well, Catherine and I would like to thank everyone for tuning in today. It's 11:30, and we appreciate very much the ability to be able to bring you these webinars, because they're of the utmost importance to us, and we really strongly believe that if we can at least get people thinking about these concepts and get people to think about how it impacts the workplace, that we truly are bringing about a better and more positive society and a more positive workplace for all involved. So I'm not sure what our topic is next month, but certainly look forward to seeing you back in a month. And until then, have a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.